15:1. Anybody go ahead.
After this, the word of the Lord came to Abram in a vision. Fear not, Abram, I am your shield. Your reward shall be very great.
Okay, now there's two ways of rewriting this. It can be your reward shall be very great, or I am your great reward. In other words, the Hebrew isn't really specific on that apparently, but either your reward will be very great, Abraham will be blessed and he'll be rewarded, or he's saying, don't fear, I am your great reward. So, yeah, right, and so does the this one here says, I am your exceeding, the New King James Version, your shield, same idea, and your shield, your exceedingly great reward. So either way, just so you understand, there is a little bit of a difference there, but the idea is either Abraham is being blessed independently from God, or he's being blessed with God because of God's greatness. Okay, there you go. That's pretty much all I have about that particular one. Go ahead, verse 2.
But Abram said, O Lord God, what will you give me? For I continue childless, and the heir of my house is Eleazar of Damascus.
Okay, now real quickly, if you look at verse 2, and I'm just thinking this out loud, so if you think something different, let me know. But he says, Lord, what will you give me? That kind of supports her translation, which it says, your reward will be very great. Because he says, in other words, do you see, if it says, I am your great reward, well then he's already given him something. Whereas the way yours is translated, I like that now that I've looked at verse 2, because verse 2 says, what will you give me? And if God says your reward will be very great, Abraham is thinking, well, what more can I have? I don't have any children. And to him, that is, anybody that doesn't have children, that wants children, understands this. That is where everything you have will go on. So I kind of agree with your translation, actually, just so you know. And it does give a footnote in mind that both, it could be one translation or another. So this one gives both. But then he goes on to say that the heir of my house is Eleazar of Damascus. In other words, he's a person that isn't even from his family. He's just a servant within the family that he picked up in Damascus on his way traveling south. He's probably his favorite servant, the steward of the household, just like Joseph was steward of Potiphar's house in Egypt. He's probably like this. He is somebody that is in great respect, but he's still just a servant within the house. And he's saying, what can you give me? Because I don't even have children, and that is the great blessing that will, whatever you give me isn't going to go to my children. Do you see the logic there? Okay, all right, verse 3, go ahead. And if anybody has anything, you guys have been kind of quiet the past couple days, or past couple weeks. I watch these and I process them. Ask questions. That's what makes this fun. Definitely. Okay, please, go ahead, verse 3.
And Abram said, Behold, you have given me no offspring, and a member of my household will be my heir. And behold, the word of the Lord came to him, This man shall not be your heir, your very own son shall be your heir. Okay, so Abraham right now is first arguing that it's somebody in his household, meaning a servant or a slave, and God says, no, it's going to be somebody from your own body. All right? We will come up, and most of you know that something gets inserted before Isaac is born, which is, actually it leads down to what happened today in America, Osama bin Laden being shot, comes from Ishmael, not from Isaac, okay? He doesn't say this is going to come from your wife, Sarah. It just says from your own body. And so, now comes the test of faith, right? And anyway, so just so you know, but that is... The guy, Osama bin Laden, and all of the Arabs are descendants of Ishmael. And we're going to learn about what that means, in probably a chapter or 2 chapters or whatever, 3 chapters. But anyway, it says that you will have a son, and it's not going to be this guy. It'll be somebody from your own body. So keep that in mind. And if you haven't read the story, it gets... I didn't even think about that till you said it. It was from his own body.
That's right.
So he wouldn't think that maybe Sarah was.
Especially after the time between this promise and when he finally gets Hagar. There is quite a bit of time involved there. And so you could see, if God said to me, suppose I move up to Maine and I'm working in the woods and I'm ordained and I just decide I want to move away from Florida and I think, maybe I want to start a church. And God says to me, well, you're going to start a church. And here I'm, 47 years old, okay? So I'm working in the woods, I'm 47, and by the time I'm 53, 58, 59, I still don't have a church, right? I'd be wondering, have I missed something? Whatever. You see what I'm saying? And so, same thing, you could use this with anything in your life. You're going to have a child, or you're going to get married. I move up to Massachusetts. Hideko, unfortunately, doesn't go with me. She divorces me. I go to Massachusetts, and I'm up there living in the woods. I'm just trying to give you an example. And I'm lonely, and the Lord speaks to me in my ear, and He says, you are going to have a wife. And no woman comes along for 20 years. But you see what I'm saying? We look at things, well, that's right, but we look at things saying, I must have missed something. It's always about us. And the longer things get pushed out, and I shouldn't have used either of those examples because, I'm not moving to Massachusetts no matter what. But you see what I'm saying is that we wonder, did I misunderstand? It's like Eve. This is kind of like going back to Eve where he says, your seed will crush the serpent's head. And so she names her son thinking that Cain is going to be the one that does it. And then it doesn't happen, and she names her next son vapor, breath, because he doesn't do it. And she thinks, I must have heard him wrong. Well, that's what's going on here. Anyway, sorry, Hideko. If you watch this, I love you. I'm staying here in Florida with you. Okay, anyway. Go ahead. Read the next verse.
And he brought him outside and said, look toward heaven and number the stars, if you are able to number them. Then he said to him, so shall your offspring be. And he believed the Lord, and He counted it to him as righteousness.
All right, let's go over to Romans. It's probably about chapter 4, but we're going to hang on one second here. This one verse sets, is it?
It says 4:18. So.
Okay, let's go here. Romans 4, you said 18? Okay, there it is. It's we're going to start back at 17 though. Actually, we're going to start at 13 because that's the beginning of a chapter. Romans chapter 4 verse 13, it says, "For the promise that he would be the heir of the world was not to Abraham or to his seed through the law, but through the righteousness of faith." Now, the verse that we just read, which is Genesis 15:6, is the text verse in the Bible for justification by faith alone. Okay, in other words, and Paul uses this again in the book of Galatians. So we're going to real quickly go through this. It says, "For if those are of the law are heirs, faith is made void." Okay? Now he's saying, I don't want to get too far away from this, but verse 13, "For the promise that he would be heir of the world," Abraham is going to be heir of the world, "was not to Abraham or to his seed through the law, but through righteousness of faith." Okay, here's what we're trying to say. Is God says, look up at the stars and count them if you can, all right? He says, if you can count them, that's where your descendants be. And he doesn't have any descendants at the time, and God has just simply said, you're going to have a son that will bring your descendants about. He looks up, he's probably 75, I think, at the time, or some age about that. I'm missing that, but anyway, I think he's about 75. He looks up and he sees all of these things. And 15:6 says, Abraham believed God, and he credited it to him for righteousness. He is declared righteous simply by believing in this unbelievable promise. Okay? Now, in verse 13, here we have Abraham in the scale of time, and then Moses is way down here 400 years later, and they received the law, the people of Israel. Okay? Now, God has already declared Abraham righteous, and that was before the law. So, in verse 13 it says, "For the promise that he would be heir of the world was not to Abraham or to his seed through the law," because the law came afterward. Where was that? "But through the righteousness of faith. For if those who are of the law are heirs, faith is made void and the promise is no effect." If these people, simply because they observe the law, are heirs of righteousness, then the faith given here doesn't matter. If you can earn God's favor through the law, then what happened to Abraham is of no effect. Okay, so hang on, let's go on a little bit here. It says, "Because the law brings about wrath." What is the purpose of the law? Paul says it in the book of Romans. He says it is to show what? To what?
Show you
No.
what's right and wrong, so you
No, actually, that's not the purpose of it. The purpose of it is to show us how utterly sinful sin is. Okay, he inserts the law. God inserts the law after he's shown us how to be saved and to be declared righteous. He gives us the law, and it's to show us how sinful sin is. Because Moses himself said, after giving the law, the person who does these things will live by them. Well, the question is, can anybody observe the law perfectly?
No.
No. And the Day of Atonement proves that, because at the end of the year, they have to ask for forgiveness again. So, of course, nobody can, right? So Jesus came and he says, I didn't come to abolish this. I came to fulfill it. God gave us the law to show us that we cannot fulfill the law. Do you see that?
Are you talking about the Ten Commandments?
The Ten Commandments plus the law of Moses. There are 613 lesser laws. Okay, so you have all of this body of law, and nobody can perfectly fulfill it. The Sabbath day, nobody has ever perfectly fulfilled the Sabbath day. All of these things in here, part of the law, Jesus cites, they ask him, what is the greatest commandment? And Jesus quotes from the law of Moses. He says, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. Okay? Now those aren't together in the law. One of them's here and one of them's in Leviticus, whatever. They're in different parts of the law. But Jesus said that is the most important commandment of the entire law. All right? From there, all of the law and the prophets hang on those two commandments. Well, the question is, and I've asked this before, can anybody say that they have honestly loved the Lord their God with all their heart, soul, mind, and strength all of their life? Not for 10 seconds. We don't do it, okay? So, if that is the most important tenet of the law, then obviously we fall short of the law. If you do these things according to Moses, you will live by them. Well, nobody can live by them. So, it's saying, this here, the law, Paul goes on in the book of Galatians, he says that the law was a tutor or a guardian. A tutor back in the Roman times was a person that raised children in a household for the parents. Okay? That's what he did. He was a person in charge of the children until they were old enough to take over the household. All right? So this law is a tutor to lead us where?
To God.
To Christ. It says it is a tutor to lead us to Christ. So you're right, to God. Because we can't fulfill the law, but this is what the law demands, is that we live by the law. Okay? But the righteousness had already been established back here by faith. So all of this isn't by faith, it's by working our way to heaven. But the question goes further. How were the people under the law saved?
Same way that some people, same way everybody else is, but they were looking forward to it.
That's right. They were saved by faith. Even the book of Habakkuk says it, from faith to faith. The just shall live by faith. Okay, so how do we know that? Because once again, the Day of Atonement. If they didn't feel that they needed the Day of Atonement, they simply wouldn't have gone down to Jerusalem. But the Day of Atonement says, you're not to eat on this day, you're to abase yourself, and you're to confess your sins before the Lord. And then the Lord set up provisions, animals, certain sacrifices, to sacrifice for the sins of the people, to withhold his wrath for another year. Okay? And that happened year after year after year. Well, if the Day of Atonement, we'll say the law came at, I don't know what year. We'll just say 1350 BC. I don't know what year. But say it came at 1350 BC. The first Day of Atonement then happens in 1350, we'll say 1351 BC, right? If the Day of Atonement and the blood of those bulls and goats could take away the sin of the people, you wouldn't need another one in 1352 BC. And Paul tells us this in, well, actually, whoever wrote Hebrews, I believe it was Paul, but whoever wrote it. He tells us that the blood of bulls and goats can never take away sin. All it does is it gives them a reminder of their past sins, year after year after year. So this is what we're talking about. Verse 15:6 here is the text verse used again and again in the New Testament. The just shall live by his faith. Abraham believed God, this promise, amazing promise, and God credited it to him for righteousness. Now, what is the promise that we hold to that declares us righteous? Christ's substitutionary death. We believe in that, and one more thing after that, there's one more thing. Paul writes it as one occurrence, even though it's two things. The death and the resurrection. If we hold to that, then we are declared righteous. That's exactly what's going on here. And how these people, like I bring them up all the time, but how can the Jehovah's Witnesses miss this?